Got everybody. Good morning, everybody. My name's Scott Lavin. I'm the Director of Research and Partnerships for the Council to Advance Hunting and the Shooting Sports. I think we have a really good program for you today. We're doing our webinar today on the nexus of R3 and deer hunting. This is some really good looking work. It has a lot of partners involved. So I'd like to introduce Jenifer Wisniewski, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for the National Deer Association. We have Bob Holsman, Senior Social Scientist for DJ Case Associates. And we have Lou Cornicelli, PhD, and MAD webinar inviter, who's the lead research strategist for Southwick and Associates. We thank everybody for the patience on the multiple emails to get you on the webinar in the right place. So we also have Amanda Pittman with us from the council, helping everybody get in the right position for the webinar. So just a quick few housekeeping notes. We have over 100 people on the webinar today, which is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for spending some time with us today. But because of that, we can't give everybody the microphone. So as the webinar is going, if you have questions, please use the chat or the Q&A option to get those questions, and I will do my best to recap your questions to the panelists throughout the webinar. So we'll do that. And with that, we're going to get started. I think Lou Cornicelli is going to kick us off. So Jenifer, if you want to bring up the presentation, please.
So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to do some of the content, then I'm going to go to Dr. Bob Holsman with DJ Case to talk about some of the middle pieces of the project, and then I'm going to Jen Wisniewski is going to take over, and then I'll do the last slide and we'll do questions. So going to keep it hopefully pretty informal. I know folks don't like death by PowerPoint. So we'll just kind of go through it. This project we call the Nexus of R3 and deer hunting. You can see the folks who worked on it over the last year. So can you advance, Jen? So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the team. I realize we do these things, and sometimes you see read these reports, and you think, well, what does this person have to do with me? We wanted to point out as a team that everyone you see here has spent a lot of their career working for Fish and Wildlife agencies. I spent almost 30 years in deer disease R3 research. Jen Wisniewski was a marketing chief for Tennessee. Bob was faculty in Wisconsin and worked for DNR in the social sciences. Gassick comes out of the deer world and ran Kentucky for a bunch of years. And then Dan obviously ran Georgia for a bunch of years and is now at the Archery Trade Association. So we approached everything that we're going to talk about today through a lens of we kind of understand what the issues are, but we may not have all the answers. But it wasn't just the survey results or what we found driving the conversation. It's really the fact that we bring, a ton of agency experience, even though none of us now work for state fish and wildlife agencies. So harass us at the end if you want, but that's where we came from. So how this project got started. Most folks know about the multi-state conservation grant program. It's money that's allocated at a PRDJ that comes off the top. It's a competitive granting program where states and NGOs and regional AFWAs compete for dollars to do projects. And so this one came about from conversations with the Trade Association and some of our state fish and wildlife agencies. And how do we bridge these two things, the R3 and deer management? So we called it the Nexus of R3 and deer management. And it really comes from these really four basic principles. That deer is, I ran a deer program for a long time. Deer are king when it comes to hunting throughout most of the U.S. I know not necessarily in the West, but the rest of the states, it's where we generate most of our revenue. Back in the day, Minnesota, a hunting license, 80% of it was deer. There's only a handful of species that we hunt actually to manage, and deer are certainly one of them. So deer are king when it comes to revenue, recreational opportunity, and management. We know that over the last 20 or so years, agencies have really expanded R3, and now most states have at least one person doing R3. And we also know that everybody does something a little bit different, and trying to figure out how can we kind of pull harvest reporting and hunter participation metrics across the U.S. And that was probably the toughest part of the project because everything is really kind of all over the board. and uh, and we'll talk about that too, just a little bit. So next slide. Oh, oh, sorry, we have one more. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry. I'm not used to animations. My bad. So as we were pulling this together, I like quotes, if folks who know me. And I was thinking about, Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, and not so much that we're talking about giant social and economic inequalities between two giant cities, more that we have a deer program and we have an R3 program, and oftentimes those points never cross. So there's inequities in budgets and sometimes in the staffing and priorities. So that's kind of, we were thinking about it that way. So there were fundamentally three main pieces of this project. We engaged the R3 and DEER coordinators. We went to all the regional AFWA meetings to talk about the project. Um, uh, Bob Holsman then was instrumental in a lot of this, but this part particularly, we pulled together a smaller team of about 20 folks to frame the issue and develop a survey. And then we fielded that survey to 96 DEER and R3 coordinators. Most of you, those folks on the call probably responded. We did a separate survey of U.S. deer hunters using a panel provider. And then we took a deep dive into 5-year harvest rates and hunter trends. Not going to, some of our recommendations will be in place there, but most of the focus is going to be on what we learned from the DNR3 coordinators because we don't have 2 hours. So what did we hear? It's all over the board, as you can imagine. We gave R3, well, both folks an opportunity to open end some questions. We ended up getting 89 of the 96 people to respond, so we have almost a full census of DNR3 coordinators. We heard from almost everybody, um, and I'll get into that. But so the comments we got, not in the loop about what R3 is doing. There's no coordination. It's an important R3 is an important program, but doesn't include the deer program. Sometimes folks meet periodically, but they don't interact. Folks would like more coordination. So we're hearing this big disconnect, which then Bob brought up. Well, this looks a lot like Cool Hand Luke. What we have here is a real failure to communicate. And we know that, we've all worked for agencies. We know we get siloed in our programs. Um, uh, we have important work to do. We may not be talking. It's hard to talk. We get it all, but it really came out in this project. Almost everybody said roughly the same thing in a little different way. And I think this quote really, really hit home for us. Working with R3 weighs those recommendations against R3, but they don't really talk to the person. Um, who's running the R3 program. And so that communication piece, and I'm speaking to the choir, but it really came out in this project. And then when we had the survey question about that directly, what are the barriers to R3 or barriers to two programs? Go ahead, Jen. Barriers to your two programs, 2/3 of the 90 people or so said they were siloed. Said our folks said the workload was already too much, which we all get. And then, 2 out of 5, 1 out of 5 people said that there was a lack of awareness in the R3 program. So, these are kind of institutional structural barriers that we can overcome, but they're tough to do. But it was interesting to see, we all took our agency time and what we observed, and then, almost every state said the same thing. So I think this is kind of the answer. Less concerned about turnover. What we like to see, or would like to see, only 8% said there was lack of support for cross-program training. So I think the opportunity would be there to work together. It's just how do we do that? And I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Holsman right now to pull some of that together.
All right. Thanks, Lou, and good morning, everybody. Um, so we had the opportunity again with addressing these two audiences to talk about, this intersection of how regulation setting and season structures and quotas and all of that impacts hunting participation, and it can impact it positively or negatively. And we wanted to ask folks to what extent they thought those positive and negative implications were considered as part of the process. So we're going to start on the positive side here. And the question is, how much does the potential positive impact on hunting participation factor into deer management decisions? It's on a scale you see on the bottom from a lot to not at all, with also a not sure option. And what you're seeing here is the percentages or frequencies aggregated by the deer manager respondents in blue, and the yellow is the R3 coordinators. And so for the deer managers looking at the blue, this is part and parcel of their jobs, right? Being responsive to public input, making sure that regulation changes or season structures have support. So it's really not surprising that 43% of them said it's a lot. They factor into it a lot. Another 41% somewhat. You see lower ratings among the R3 coordinators. Only 14% said a lot. But really, the one that jumps out to me on this slide is the 28% who aren't sure. So I'm going to do a little conjecturing here about that 28% based on some of the conversations we had with the steering group that Lou mentioned that we pulled together. And I think basically what it comes down to is there is some tendency for turnover among our three coordinators, and they tend to be folks who are a little bit earlier in their career, and we saw that too in the survey responses. And so they may not be fully up to speed or aware of how deer management regulations are set or what the opportunities are to jump in and have an influence or have a say. So that that highlights again this theme you're hearing over and over again already this morning about bridging the gap in communication. And Jen, when she gets into recommendations, is going to detail some ways that we think that can happen. But maybe as a quick preview to that, it kind of takes just intentional effort to make it happen, and then also pursuing support from the supervisory level. Next slide. This one looks a whole heck of a lot like the last one you saw. Okay, kind of the same question, except now we're asking whether the negative impacts on hunting participation, like for example, tag restrictions or quotas that get reduced. One of the things that was really apparent to us in our conversations with people, and I think it's important to note, is that there's an eastern-western divide or difference when it comes to deer management for many state agencies. And in the East and in the Midwest and Southeast, it's often a struggle to get hunters to take enough antlerless deer to meet deer management objectives, whether those are related to forest regeneration or disease management like CWD. It's hard in the East. Basically, the supply of deer hunting opportunity exceeds the demand for venison in most cases. So we have, a number of studies that Lou's been involved in, I've been involved in, that suggest, hunters in general are interested in taking about a deer and a half a year. And so if you're putting out a bunch of tags, if they're not interested in filling them, that may not work. In the West, however, states like where Scott hails from, where deer hunters have to wait, maybe multiple years to get a deer hunting tag, that's a different story. And so we recognize that, it's not a one size fits all here. I kind of went on a little digression here. Let me get back to the chart. So this is, Jenny, yeah, sorry. Go back there. Sorry. Yeah, the negative impact. Again, the frequency distribution is very similar to the previous slide. Again, we see, deer managers, most of them saying, yep, we consider it a lot. And again, the R3 folks, not so much. All right. We also had the opportunity in the survey to ask the R3 people about what species they focused on or centered on when it came to providing programs. So when you think about field to fork or learn to hunt or mentored training programs that are designed around some species or some season, it's not surprising that deer tops the list. So 79% of our R3 respondents said they do deer programs. I don't know. I was a little bit personally surprised that waterfall came out as high as it did, almost as high at 77%, and then it kind of drops down from there. Um, and so obviously, a lot of states are offering programs across multiple species, right? Because this was a check all apply question. So one of the things Jen's going to get into is what impact does that have on, our overall impact when we're, kind of spreading across a variety of species. Next slide. All right. This was a really interesting finding, I think, for us on the research team. So, and this was Lou's idea. Why don't we ask them about the 4 Rs and what they think the priorities are? Okay, so this is again a question that was shown just to the R3 coordinators. Okay, so we asked them first of all what they believe their state agencies' priorities are relative to these 4 Rs. And so their response goes right in line with the way they're listed here in the rows. Okay, they said their state's top priority is recruitment, then retention, then reactivation, and then relevancy. Then we asked them, which is the next column over, what they thought the priority order should be among those 4 Rs. And you see some interesting flipping going on. So they ranked relevancy as what they thought the top priority should be, followed by retention, and then recruitment and reactivation. So a little bit different responses based on what they think the state priorities are versus what they think they should be. Now, let's add something else. This wasn't from the survey, but this is something we've talked about as a research team relative to those responses, which is, well, if you're talking about what should you do based on return on investment, it probably looks like retention first, reactivation second. We could probably get into an arm wrestling match about what's third and fourth on that list. But again, this is based on case studies that are available in the clearinghouse. This is based on personal experience, professional experience, a lot of the work Jen has done throughout her career and so forth. Now, let me clarify a couple of points about this. We are not, as a research team, suggesting that 1 and 2 ought to be retention and reactivation. The return on investment column is if that is your objective, right? So if the objective is to sell more licenses or maintain licenses sales, then you got to look at how can we do that most efficiently with the capacity and the resources available. And if that is the objective, then you're going to have better luck retaining customers than making new ones. And that's sort of basic marketing strategy. Now, there are other objectives for R3. It may not be return on investment. It may not be selling licenses. And if that's the case, then there's a different ranking and a different priority order. Okay. Next slide. All right, Jen's going to tell us what we're supposed to do with all of these findings and all of this information, and she's going to break it down in terms of several sections of recommendations. Those are shared among R3 coordinators and DEER managers, those that are specific to R3, those that are specific to DEER, and those that are more targeting agency leadership. So somebody with who I would call one of the old guns of R3. Jenifer, take it away.
Jenifer, before you get started, if I may,
Yes.
Jenifer, before you get started, we do have a question specific to Bob's section. Bob, could you elaborate a little bit on relevancy, please?
Okay. In terms of that ranking?
I think just what are you classifying as relevancy? That's the question.
That's a good question, and this is going to be kind of a weaselly response. Relevancy is a term that we chose not to define on the survey, and we had conversations about whether we should or shouldn't do that. We chose to leave it sort of in the eye of the beholder. So from an R3 perspective, if R3 folks are telling us that relevancy should be number one, I think that probably merits some more digging and some more exploration about what are they thinking about when they made that selection. And so, that's something maybe would be an interesting point for us to discuss here as a group.
Thank you.
I'm about to go into some recommendations, and a lot of these are going to sound like really easy, wonderful things to do, but I just want to take a moment and recognize that some of these things are very difficult to do in a large state agency to steer ship and go a different direction. So yes, these things might sound simple, but know that we all on this call recognize how difficult some of these things could be in an agency setting. So first, both programs, let's talk about that whole retention versus recruitment thing. Every industry recognizes that customer retention is where they invest the most money. I see Scott nodding. He came from the retail world, as did I, and we invested most of our marketing money into retaining those people that already were your customers. Recruiting a new hunter, we know how much investment that takes, but reactivating, we saw it in COVID, right? Like people came out of the woodwork that had hunted who knows how long ago and went back out and did it again. And if we aren't putting a lot of effort into retention and reactivation efforts through marketing, through emails, through all of those things, that's the number one place that we need to be focused. And then not just because I work for the National Deer Association, but because deer literally provide the highest return on investment through PR, through in a lot of states. I should also say this part, like the recommendations that we're saying here are going to be for where deer are just everywhere. So the over-the-counter tags, long seasons, all of those states that don't have a limited opportunity for deer hunting. But if you are in one of those states that have plenty of deer, you need to be focusing your R3 programming on deer. Out of the 14 million hunters in the United States, 11 million of them hunt deer. And yes, there's a lot of those deer hunters that turkey hunt and duck hunt and elk hunt and all of those others do the other. There's a lot of crossover, but everybody hunts deer pretty much that hunts. And then there's an access problem. So repeatedly, we have seen access be an issue, and it's not a public land thing, it's a private land thing. So we need to increase access on private lands, especially in, thinking about farmland with depredation issues, with just too many deer. So for R3 coordinators specifically, it can be a touchy subject, but truly we need to stop focusing on youth recruitment programs as R3. Adult retention and reactivation should be your primary focus. I'm not saying don't do youth programs. Youth programs have a great public relations look. They have a great, it feels like a warm hug when you've gone and taken some youths out in the woods and they've harvested their first animal. It's a wonderful thing. Do youth programs, but don't make them part of your R3 strategy. R3 needs to be focused on adults that have control over their time, they have transportation, they get to decide what they go do today and have their own money to spend. All of those things should be reasons that we are focusing on adults. And I'm going to harp a little bit, but deer-focused R3 programs have the best opportunity for scale and impact, especially, in those states that have too many deer. We have the opportunity to impact the resource, remove more deer off the landscape, put them in the food chain, and do great things for other species by removing those deer and giving other species more food to eat, right? Oh, there we go. So crossbows, man. So bow hunters, I like this quote, Lou. Bow hunters are anti-crossbow until they need a crossbow, right?
Yep.
So I think that we can all agree that crossbows are a great tool to use to increase participation. They can have an impact, and there's some really great information and case studies in the full report that is on the R3 Clearinghouse. If everybody wants to go read it afterwards, you can just go to the R3 Clearinghouse and search the word Nexus, and there it is. But do not leave crossbows off the table when you're talking about how to increase participation. And we got to align deer management with R3, like where you need more animals removed off the landscape, you need to be talking to your R3 people to get more people involved. I think, Bob, was it you that says a deer and a half a year? We're not going to move that needle. There's places that deer season is darn near 200 days, and it still hasn't increased, and the bag limit's 15 deer plus, and it still hasn't increased a deer and a half or 1.8 in some places or 1.2 in some places. That it hasn't changed that. So we know that that's what a deer hunter is willing to harvest. So unless we're going to figure out how to increase the capacity for donations and ease for donations and do all of that, the lightest weight there is to get more R3 programs going on places that need R3. And then for deer hunters, every state works with private landowners. And whether you call that your private lands program, your walk-in access program, your deer management assistance program, whatever that program is in your state, I hope that you will coordinate those people with your R3 staff, because those two can overlap. And we have seen the relationship that the biologist builds with the landowner. They can leverage that relationship to allow more hunting on their land with people that they coordinate R3 events with. So don't discount that relationship that you're building with landowners, and make sure you're using that opportunity to put more hunters on their land where it's necessary. Oh, buddy, hunter perceptions matter as much as biological metrics. Ooh, it's so true, right? So you can change a deer regulation and it just make hunters angry for whatever reason, and you're going to affect participation as much as any R3 program ever could. So we definitely have to take in hunter perceptions in every kind of regulation that we're making. Deer are easy to manage, right? It's the people that are hard, especially deer hunters. They're so opinionated. And we've seen, again, 200-day deer seasons. You can kill them with dynamite to anything. And people aren't going to kill more than a deer and a half, 1.8 a year. So we really need to leverage our R3 programs in places that need more deer harvested. And then with agency leadership, they can facilitate formal communication between our deer management experts and our R3 people. That's an easy one. And support cross-training. So I married a wildlife biologist. And when I did, I learned a heck of a lot about, why we set bag limits of where we do, why we do season dates, why all of the recruitment, like fawn recruitment, not like species recruitment, not hunter recruitment, but why some of these things matter and all of the science behind things. And a lot of R3 people are not cross-trained on that kind of stuff. And it would do a world of good for our R3 staff to understand the basics of not just deer biology, but biology in general. So some cross-training. And then vice versa, it does a lot of good for people like Bob and Lou to understand what I do and understand that without licensed sales, you don't have a job. So it really, really matters that we continue to have hunting as a tradition and maintain a population of hunters. So supporting cross training over these folks is hugely important. And then in my day, we started making KPIs or key performance indicators of what your retention rate should be in a state. So if you don't have a key performance indicator for what success looks like for R3, for deer management, I would strongly encourage you to set those. So if your hunter recruitment and retention rate is, say your retention rate's 75%, well, let's set a KPI of 78% for next year. Do something that sets a goal so that you can all get behind it as an entire staff and have that outcome in mind. Maybe your goal is to get people to harvest 2 deer in a year, and you can make that effort. So make some real metrics so that you're not just saying we're doing R3 out there. You can say we have moved the needle. We have gone from a 70% retention rate to an 80% retention rate. Those are real numbers, and that can show your real success along the way. And that's all I got, but I'm going to turn it back over to Lou. But I realize that those are hard things to do in the real world, but we are here to help, and the report is on the R3 Clearinghouse. But Lou, give us a wrap-up thoughts.
I can do that, and I appreciate that. Now I know why people said don't ever follow Jaywiz in a presentation. So wrap up thoughts, and then we'll get to questions. So first one, you're still driving, Jen.
I just quit.
No, so there you go.
Backwards.
There you go. To wrap everything up, really easy to say, hard to do. Effective deer management in R3, they're not competing objectives, right? Jen talked about that. An area wildlife manager might have an issue with locally abundant deer populations on private land in August or September. How can that be leveraged against the R3 program to get new hunters or returning hunters onto that property to help manage deer? Generally hit it, de-emphasize youth programs. I remember way back in the day when I was running the big game program, my good friend Ryan Bronson and I put together a youth hunt on a game refuge, which was a really desirable activity. Ryan and I were really excited. Minnesota's youth is 17 and under. We were super pumped. All these kids had registered. We showed up, and I think half the kids shaved more often than I did and drove themselves to the event. We didn't recruit a single person. They were all already hunters. So we ended up kicking youth programs back to 15. So epic failed recruitment, epic win on good feelings. Like Jen said, continue to focus on deer, especially where there's too many. I get this doesn't apply to a lot of the West, but it may apply in suburban areas in the West. So are there opportunities that you just don't see right in front of you? But the focus on deer, I think, is the important piece where possible. To add a little bit from the rest of the project, like I said at the beginning, one of the toughest pieces of this project was trying to figure out what all the states are doing. It took a ton of time. I'm certain what's in the report is not entirely accurate because we did the best we could, but it's all over the board. And it would be great if there was a national dashboard that all the states participated in, or a little bit more consistency in hunter and harvest reporting, evaluating those that what you can see what other states are doing, look at your own trends. We really had to put a lot of effort into just figuring out what the states are doing, and it wasn't perfect. So being more consistent with stuff, and then those hunter surveys are really important. And some states do them, other states don't. But there's a real disconnect, and this comes back from the hunter survey we did, and we know this. There's a real disconnect between what the biologists and coordinators think and what the hunters think. And the easiest one is too many deer versus not enough deer. But one of the things that showed up in our hunter survey is that places to process your venison and places to donate venison were not considered barriers by our hunters, but our our deer coordinators, not to the person, but a lot of them said, gosh, if we just had a way for people to get rid of their deer or had more processors, we could solve some of our problems. The hunter said it's not a problem. So, and that feeds into the 1.2 to 1.8. So, there's really a disconnect, even with perceptions of how deer are utilized, versus what the biologist thinks, in addition to the population stuff. So
Hey,
to wrap
Lou,
it up, yep,
can I just,
of course.
I have a thought. So in that same vein, we have also seen proactive communications campaigns around increasing harvest and taking one more deer this year and here's a place to donate it, have a positive impact on harvest rates in those areas where those proactive communications campaigns and the marketing campaign takes place. So that, yes, hunters don't say that it's a barrier. However, if you encourage hunters to take one more deer, we have seen people harvest more deer in those areas and take more doe when you communicate about it.
Okay. And then I think this is the last slide, Jen. Next one should be the last.
Break down barriers, and then that.
Yep, then breaking down the barriers coordination. Jenny hit that really well. I won't harp on that. So on behalf of the council, the National R3 Symposium is May 4th to the 7th in Des Moines. So open invite to attend that. Scott can talk about it. Be nice to have a few deer people in the crowd. If you can jump in the car or the truck with the R3 person and come to the meeting, that's a great spot to start your collaborations if you're not doing them right now. Scott, anything to add before we go to questions? So I'll just turn it over to you for questions.
I've never had anybody give the plug before, so I'm on uneven ground here. Thanks for that, Lou. If you guys have enjoyed this content and want more like it, the symposium is May 4th through the 7th in Des Moines, Iowa. We have a beautiful venue and an amazing agenda of this type of cutting edge content. So with that, the questions are flooding in, and since we have biologists on the line, they're really smart questions, so I'm going to struggle to read them to you guys. Becky, I saw you had your hand up. We don't have mics for everybody, but if you type in your question in the Q&A, we'll definitely get you taken care of. One of the questions that popped up, I'm getting my phone blown up on text as well. Jenifer, during your part of the presentation, you were talking about measuring your retention rate. Can you define or tell us what was your formula for measuring your retention rate, and what state was that?
Sure. So I was a communication marketing I&E chief in Georgia and in Tennessee. And the first time that I attempted to measure retention was when I was in Georgia, and Dan Forster challenged me to show how we were moving the needle. So I had to establish a baseline. And so it's all based on license sales. And it's, you have this person that buys a license in this year and the next year, and as long as they're purchasing a license in that year, we count that as a retained hunter or angler. And so that is how I define retention. And we just wanted to see an increase each year. And I will say an average for hunting is somewhere in the 70-ish realm, and the average for fishing was somewhere in the 35 to 40% realm when I was doing state agency work. And my retention rate goal was always 80%. If we can retain 80% of our customers from year to year, and then reactivate 10%, and then recruit another 10%, then we are at, flat. We have made the numbers for the year.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, this one's a little bit of a mouthful. Great work on this project. Michigan has done a lot of work and efforts of getting Learn to Hunt program participants on private farms in recent years. However, I do not believe this has been a large scale, parentheses, thousands, that could make a difference in terms of either R3 or deer population management on a state level. To this end, is this project team or anyone on the webinar aware of any such private land access developments in recent years in the U.S. that are at a large scale?
Well, the refuges just all got opened up to hunting. That's a pretty large scale. We'll see how that impacts participation. But in general, all the private land stuff, it's private land holding. So it's going to be small scale. It's going to be, um, you know, county level even. You just it being private land is in and of itself going to make it smaller impacts, but it's still an impact and it's still access and it's still something that we should be focusing on.
I can speak a little bit of my experience in Arizona Game and Fish. Dan Sterling did a really great job with the department's landowner relationships program, developing opportunities for landowners to open their gates and let hunters on them. It was a very organized and formal effort of the departments. So you guys may want to reach out to them. Um,
Kansas has a great walk-in access.
Yeah, and the programs that are funded from, BPA, HIP, the
Yeah.
walk-in block management, depending on what they call them, there are programs, but I don't know if they get to localized management, right? They're more, a lot of them are geared towards upland bird hunting, and I think in Minnesota you can
Yeah.
hunt deer on a walk-in access, but that may not be true in every case.
Well, and then there's not a measure of the usage of those lands. So again, we're back to we don't have the data to show, but we know that access is the barrier. So that's what we're trying to address.
I
so
think
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry,
Bob.
Scott. Yeah, I was going to jump in. I think the access issue is a really good one that runs through a lot of this presentation here today, because when you're talking about access, as Jen mentioned, it's really private land access is the where the retention's going to be, and in terms of opportunities, I'm thinking back to when I said earlier that it seems as though some of the R3 folks may not have the deer training background to recognize and see opportunities. I should have said, I'm not sure the deer managers have the R3 background to recognize the opportunities as well. And one of those certainly is access. And whether it's, I think everybody on this call agrees that, DMAPs are probably an untapped potential, but there are others, crop damage programs in states, whatever you can leverage to give people an opportunity to go out and hunt in a situation that they wouldn't have had otherwise, is a good thing. But it requires sort of being intentional, being coordinated, being creative, trying some new things. And then the last thing I'll say, see, you get me talking, Scott. Why did you let me start this? The other thing, I would say about that is, while we've used the term deer managers, and talking about people that are running big game programs, and those are the ones we surveyed, I think there's opportunity for all field biologists, property managers, anybody out in the agencies that is on the ground, understands who the neighbors are, can be potential conduits and ambassadors to help make those connections for the R3 folks. So.
And just my personal experience, Arizona was not my resident state. I moved there, and I think we all get in the minutia of our day and thinking that, well, it's in the manual, it's easy to find. It's really not. There's been a lot of research on regulations being barriers. And just sending an email or doing a press release doesn't mean you've caught everybody. This outreach and educating the public on the opportunities and how to take advantage of them is a job that literally will never be done. So
Yeah, got to beat the drum continuously,
so
broken record style.
Lou, you continue to try to mess me up. Yeah, answered a question and it disappeared out of the Q&A, and I'm like thinking I'm a little
Oh, I'm
crazy.
sorry. Yeah, it was a
That's
question
okay.
was, do crossbows count towards the excise tax? The answer is yes.
Yes, they do. Good deal. All right, thank you for that. All right, they continue to stream in here. All right, again, very, very complicated questions here. It seems as though much of the findings are focused on overpopulated deer areas. Where I'm doing R3, we have declining populations of deer and looking to improve numbers. Managers have mentioned that doing too good of a job with R3 is almost concerning, as we have plenty of deer harvest. There are some other species in the same in the area to target, but it's limited. And this area is primarily a deer hunting area. Small game and waterfowl are options, but even for our R3 staff, access is a major challenge. So for new folks, it's even harder. Any suggestions? Great question.
Yeah, it is. I guess I'll jump in first if that's okay. I think, yes, and we knew that when we did the project, the presentation, that it was emphasized, deer is the emphasis, knowing that deer aren't an issue in many states. So we get that. Are there opportunities on state parks that can be open for special opportunity, whether it's deer or something else? Is the R3 person, every state has regional wildlife biologists, area, whatever you want to call them. Does that person know somebody who has some private land they're willing to let some kids squirrel on? That's that communication piece. We don't need giant blocks of land to kill a ton of deer in all cases. We may just need a small parcel to put some kids out or adults out, or adults are getting back into hunting, which we saw some from another project, and are looking for a place to go. And that's the third R, right? We're getting those re-engaging folks and getting them back out there. We know that folks who have kids that reach hunting and fishing age want to get back into it because they did as kids, and they're looking for places to go. So does your area wildlife manager know of a spot where they could get some of those people out? And that's that communication piece. I'll cut it there because we're gonna run out of time.
And I wonder if hunter perceptions are never that there's too many of whatever they're chasing, although it may be the case. So you're never going to hear a hunter complain about there being too many deer. But if it's truly you have too many hunters and not enough deer, then it sounds like the R3 problem is solved. Move on to the next species. But if it's not, if it's just a perception instead of reality, then that's a different situation.
I think the one thing I'd add too is, you need to consider that question from both the now and the future perspective. So now you may feel like, or people may have the perception in your agency that we have enough hunters already, we don't need any more. Wait 15 years.
Yeah.
Or look ahead 15 years, because as everybody, I'm sure most of the people on this call have seen the graphs and the charts and the cliff, and we're an aging demographic, and we're going to need replacement, I think, everywhere, regardless of what your deer numbers are now.
What a timely answer, Bob, for the next question. Next question is, in many states, a large portion of their hunters are beginning to age out of the support. Emphasis on retention and reactivation doesn't address that reality. How do we balance the need for maintaining enough hunters for effective deer management against keeping the hunters we have engaged? Perfect question.
It is. I'm gonna grab that one. I appreciate Brendan asking it. We joked around about this project that R3 doesn't make people younger, right? So I totally agree. Which is why we talked about crossbows, and in some states, scopes on muzzleloaders, getting some of those older hunters, of which I am, that they can keep hunting for a couple extra years. And we did another project on that, which we can share that too. But trying to get those folks that I can't see anymore, I need to use a scope, or I can't pull my bow back anymore, but I want a bow hunt. And that's that retention piece. The reactivation piece, you can think about what I just mentioned, a parent wanting to take their kid hunting, but they have no place to go because they did it when they were a kid. So I think everything, is obviously connected. And realizing that we're not making people younger, but what tools can we provide that keep people out there a little bit longer, and helping with that management side, knowing that new folks coming in are slower and not slow, or lesser. So
well, and I'll say, yes, we want to keep them hunting 70 and beyond. And we have identified those self-sufficients, like the homesteader types, the people, we've identified groups of people that are very likely to want to try hunting. And those are the groups that we need to be targeting for getting into hunting. And, again, de-emphasize youth programs, go to the homesteading group or the 4-H club, the folks that are wanting to be self-sufficient, people that want to put their own food on their own table. Those are likeliest candidates, and those are the folks that we need to focus on trying to bring into the sport, as opposed to casting a wide net.
So this next one gets to the, this is definitely a passionate topic in our industry. I agree with the concept to emphasize adult focused. I couldn't disagree more with the statement of youth focused recruitment activities should be de-emphasized or taken out of R3. And I'm not sure that was your point, Jenifer.
Yeah, it's youth programs aren't not R3, I guess is a good thing. So the research that's been done, like Lou was saying, a lot of times we take our own people that would have hunted anyway, and we're not moving the needle. And where I worked on R3 plans, we categorize those youth programs as more of a public relations, a feel good, uh, general great thing, great program for us to do, but recognizing that the return on investment is not going to be a lifetime license sale, like the lifetime of that customer. It's not necessarily going to be that. It's going to be a different payoff. Whereas when you're creating an adult hunter, they're immediately purchasing a gun, purchasing ammo, purchasing those licenses. In a lot of states, you don't even need a license until you're 16. So a youth can't even buy into the system until then. So it's something that it's, I'm not saying it doesn't have an effect on long-term participation, but the way that I've seen agencies do it is not as effective as if their goal is ROI, meaning a license sale, to concentrate on adults.
So that ties into another question I've got here is should ROI be the focus for R3 or preserving hunting heritage and tradition, which is I think is a really great provocative question.
It's up to the state. I mean, that's
it's up
it.
to the
In
agency.
your state, you might want to grow hunter numbers. In some states, they're wanting to maintain. Some states, they're wanting to see how many hunters they can make to take deer out to maintain their ecosystems. I mean, like, there's a whole slew of things out there that could be your goal. But as a marketer, my goal is to fund all of our agencies to the best of our ability. If deer hunting stopped tomorrow, state agencies would cease to be. Like, it's over a third of every state agency's budget is deer hunting and the revenue that's generated from it. So that's just reality. It comes down to a business at some point.
I think, you guys have heard me talk a lot about ambassadorship, and I think that all R3 should uh, invest training in the participants so that people are better ambassadors. I do think the culture of what we do needs to be communicated better. But I agree, at the end of the day, Jenifer, you've got to keep the lights on. Um,
I think about it this way too. So if I put my marketing hat on, I don't care if you buy a license and hunt anything. I just want you to buy the widget, right? But if I put I love hunting and I've been a hunter since I was a kid, I'm very passionate about it, then I care about R3. I want you to hunt forever. I want you to love it as much as I do. I want you to put food on your table for generations to come. But it's just two different hats to wear.
And
okay,
they're not mutually exclusive hats.
Right.
You know, that's the other thing about it. That is a great question, Scott, and I think it dates back to the beginning of R3. What are we trying to accomplish? And we're not here to tell you what that answer is, but it's a good question to raise and discuss within and amongst your programs.
Mm-hmm.
So, guys, we're at 56 minutes. I'm going to keep going through the questions. We're going to hang in, but we'd scheduled the webinar for an hour. Some of you may have to fall off. I just really want to thank everybody again. Really, really great questions. This was obviously an engaging topic. I'm going to move on to the next here, but if you guys have to go for the day, again, thank you for joining us.
Before folks drop off, Scott, I just want to mention we are going to pull. There was a lot of interest among the deer and R3 folks to do a workshop. and we're going to get that. We have a lot of content, and these questions are going to be some of that content. So we're going to save them. But I think as we pull our workshop together and invite folks, we're going to talk about this stuff again because there's interest. So we're gonna
Indeed.
do a smaller workshop too. So
And if you want to link to the report that Jenifer referenced, that's in the chat. It's on the council's clearinghouse. So by all means, go and pull that report. And then we're just going to keep going through the questions here. So this is a comment as much as a question. Youth, adult, women, and other target audiences are approaches, but not the key variable. If you're not moving participants through the adoption sequence, through multiple engagements, continuation with support, social support, progressive skill development, they all lapse.
100%. It's not a one-off.
Unless they click auto renew and forget about it.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad
Yeah.
thing.
And every project that since I've jumped over to Rob's shop, and I'm sure other folks would agree, on every project we do on new hunters, the skills-based stuff rises to the top. In addition, I need a place to go that's not an hour and a half from my house, but I need more training. Hunter education, hunter safety does not teach me how to hunt generally. It gives me some basic skills, but it doesn't turn me into a hunter. So so Doug's perfectly correct on that.
Excellent. Okay. I do not agree. I do not agree. You can say to abandon youth programs per R3 as a blanket statement. Are we taking hunting R3, shooting sports R3 was, sorry guys, I need a new prescription here. With so many youth shooting sports programs resulting in millions of dollars in Fed aid revenue, not considering this in your R3 efforts is missing the mark. Simply focusing on retention is like rearranging chairs on the decks of the Titanic. I love that. In models of youth programs that are proven to work, are you suggesting we move the focus away from them? I think this is better stated to de-emphasize poorly modeled R3 programs. Do you really think abandoning youth shooting sports programs that introduce youth in and their families to you and developing pathways to the outdoors in large scalable numbers is a good idea?
I'll take that one.
I
don't believe we said abandon youth programs. And if that came across, I apologize. I think what we're saying is, I think a lot of people, especially those who aren't in R3, frankly, every day, when you mention this, the first thing they think about is taking kids out hunting. And so that winds up not only being a popular feel-good thing, but it tends to be, in many cases, the only thing people think about. And so our point is you need multiple strategies and multiple tools in the toolbox. And there probably needs to be more emphasis on adults. If again, short-term return on investment is what your objective is. So that want to clarify that. The other thing I would say is, if there are models that are working, absolutely, because with this demographic shift coming up, again, we can't just retain the group we have. That's what we need to do in the short term. We do need to continue to fill the pipeline for a whole bunch of reasons. So I hope we didn't, miscommunicate that throughout this. Is yes, there's definitely a role for youth programs, but it shouldn't be the only and primary focus. Jen?
We also need to recognize that we've got tens of thousands of kids going through shooting sports programs in each state, and not tens of thousands of kids starting to hunt in each state every year. And I think, we've tried to build that funnel from shooting sports into hunting fairly unsuccessfully for many years. And I mean, I've been unsuccessful at it too. I'm not trying to say that it's not worth the effort. But in Tennessee, it was as slight of a tweak as, instead of a youth program, we took the whole family. So if your kid wanted to learn how to hunt, you had to come with them. So mom or dad or guardian had to come too. And if you didn't know how to hunt, then you were going to learn too. So it was adjusting one little thing. Then it brought the family unit instead of I'm sending Junior to go learn how to hunt this weekend.
I really appreciated the distinction in the question of poorly modeled R3 programs. I think many of us
Mm-hmm.
14 years ago sitting around the R3 table, there wasn't that many of us back then. And the metric for success was pictures of kids smiling, which, everybody wants that positive experience, but it didn't translate. And, Jenifer, I'm sure you may have a similar experience, but when we were in business, we never had a 12-year-old drive themselves to the store and make a purchase. So that was a bit of a challenge for us. I like this question here. What about when R3 is competing with deer management objectives? In the West, we want more sales, but we have point systems to hunt general deer units. Is this a false dichotomy? How do you see alternative collaborations moving forward in the West? Really great question.
Yeah, it is, Matt. Really good question. I'll try it first. You're right. That's where we had these whole caveats about the West, and Utah's and a lot of the Western states are different because in order to apply for big game, you need to buy a hunting license, so you're already counted as a federal aid person. So we can talk about that later. But and Utah also has a ton of hunting opportunities. They have for 25 years or more. So I don't think it's a false dichotomy, but I think it ends up being a prioritization for that individual agency. Utah might be different. Like when I was the Northern Region manager, we had lots and lots of winter elk depredation problems. So we would try and find hunters to come back and shoot elk off of haystacks. Could an R3 program be used on some of those depredation issues? In winter in northern Utah or anywhere else. So I think there's opportunities. There's no these false dichotomies, but it really depends on those local situations for that particular state and what that state's objectives are. And I think that's a squishy answer, but it's not one peg we can pound into a hole.
Excellent. Excellent.
Let me take the conversation out of the West and apply it uh, to Wisconsin. So, and I know some colleagues of mine from Wisconsin DNR on the call. Hey, everybody. Hope I don't tick you off too much with this, but here goes. So, like in Wisconsin, we have a point preference system for bear hunting, and it takes, depending on which zone you're interested in hunting, 10 or 12 years to draw a tag. My son and I were both fortunate enough to go last year, but I know Wisconsin DNR puts on learn to bear hunt programs. Okay. You have to walk through the logic of introducing somebody to hunting for a species that even if they're excited about, they're not going to get another chance to pursue it for 10 or 12 years. Okay. Now there may be other reasons to do that. Maybe you want to showcase the culture of bear hunting in the state or something of that matter, but it's not recruitment because it just doesn't make sense. And so it's not just a Western thing. States, depending on what species you're talking about, may also be in that situation where there's already a higher demand for what the population of animal can supply. And so that again makes it even more important that the game species programs and the R3 folks sit down and intentionally think through what are our objectives and what are the most effective strategies to get us there.
Yeah, what's the carrying capacity for hunters for turkeys in your state? What's the carrying capacity for deer hunters in your state? Like, you got to think of it in the same biological terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leads into the next question.
Yeah, so hunter surveys to understand hunter perception on a proposed regulatory change seem very important. Curious about how to treat general hunter resistance to change. For instance, in a real-world example, before a change was made, hunter survey responses showed 40% support, 60% opposed. Then the change was done anyway. 5 years later, a hunter survey showed the opposite, 60% support, 40% opposed. This example has been used as a reason not to survey hunters before change is made.
I'm going to take this one because this was the topic of my PhD dissertation. Yeah, we know that, right? Everybody wants to be a millionaire, but nobody's willing to give up what it takes to be a millionaire. We did it by doing an attitude survey. Do you support or oppose coupled with a choice experiment where someone had to choose a regulatory package with one option being I would quit. So there's some other methods to get at an answer without just a simple attitude survey. And we know that most regulatory changes are at best a coin flip, right? It's if you're lucky if it's 50-50, and then you have to make the decision, is the change worth the grief? We did the same thing in Minnesota. Antler point restrictions were like 47-53 against and for, but they were the highest selected alternative in the choice survey. We did them 3 years later. We surveyed hunters, and it was 60-40 to keep them. And I think only 15% were opposed. The rest were neutral. So you can make a regulatory change that's not supported, but without that foundational data, I think it's hard to, well, you can't measure it, right? You don't know pre and post, but I think you have to, as a former deer manager who did a PhD in the social sciences, you have to measure where you are before you do something. And then sometimes it's a risk, right? It's never clear, but that choice experiment is a good way to kind of get at what folks are willing to accept rather than just evaluate, I like broccoli or don't like broccoli.
And Scott, I got to jump in here because this is one of my favorite topics too. First of all, the side note, which is, oftentimes you'll hear or you'll get feedback from hunters, like a license fee increase. Well, that's it. I'm quitting. I'm not going to do it again. And guess what? They're not quitting. So in most cases, when there's resistance or opposition to a regulation change, hunters will complain about it because that's what we do. It's actually probably one of the things that gives us satisfaction. But yet, at the end of the day, it's rare when it will cause somebody to just abandon something, especially if it's been part of their identity for a long time. Back to the idea of what a survey shows. Okay, so if it's 60-40 for or 60-40 against, I like to point out that surveys are not designed to be referendums. Sometimes they're interpreted and used that way, but I've often counseled people through the years that a survey can be a great tool for an agency to anticipate where opposition or challenges are going to come from and from who and from which group. Okay. So again, if there's a strong biological reason to go ahead with something anyway, I think it's still valuable to survey your public and your stakeholders. And if they come back and tell you they're not supportive of it, that gives you a head start on the outreach and engagement that you have to do to start building that support.
Excellent. This next question, you guys have heard me go on about scale. So I'm loving this question. To further the prior question about scale, most R3 efforts I've seen involve dozens to several hundred participants a year. That's not going to substantially move the needle for R3 or deer management. Are you aware of ongoing programs that are scalable to the order of thousands and tens of thousands of participants?
Yeah, I can answer that. So putting into place effective marketing for retention increased license revenue in Tennessee by $4 million in tens of thousands of hunters. Emailing, texting, telling people about opportunities nearby. That was the biggest impact on R3 that anything has made. Like if you do the same efforts in every state of emailing around license expiration, just communicating about opportunities, reminding people that deer season is coming up. Like, all of those things are the needle mover when it comes to R3.
And if I could add, so a couple things. I'll put another plug in for the symposium. There's been some interesting work this year on what they're calling the ripple effect of R3, in which it looks like we may be getting greater returns than we're measuring on R3 efforts. So that may be something of interest to this inquiry. And then also, just from the council's experience, states that work with their constituency and put together a state alliance or a collaboration of R3 efforts achieve a greater scale. It's another thing I learned in business. No one can get everyone. No one organization has the resources, to the point made earlier about the number of engagements necessary for a family or an individual to self-identify as a hunter. None of us have the resources solely to take somebody on that journey. It does take a village, so there's that. All right, let's see here. Guys, I think we're going to call it on the half hour. We're 11 past. We still have over half our audience, so I'm game to keep going as long as the panelists are willing to hang in. But fall off as you need to. Not a question, but here in Washington, many private timber companies that own millions of acres of land have moved to the pay-to-play model, which essentially locks out all but those willing to pay upwards of $400 per person to gain access. This is creating crowding on public lands, which is a significant detriment to making big game hunting attractive to new hunters, for example.
Yeah, I think that's Tom, right? He's right. When many years ago, Minnesota has a lot of industrial forests. A lot of it's been sold off, but we had one of the industrial forest managers would chronically complain about deer affecting regen, but they also leased parcels for hunting, but tied no restrictions on harvest to the lease, right? So they're privatizing their land, which they can do, but complaining about deer, but not making people shoot does. And our conversation got tense, and I told him never to call me again as long as you managed your lands that way. But yeah, it's a real issue, right? You have these issues. You have that some of this land that may or may not have been used by the public, and now it's leased and they can't get on, so they give up. So institutional challenge.
There's not a short-term fix to this, but when I referenced the Arizona Landowner Relationships Program, that was the department working with landowners to adjust a fair, reasonable price to make hunting obtainable. And those are long-term relationships that need to be brokered. Dealing with a big industry like a lumber mill or a timber company, that could be a bit more challenged. But I do think there's an opportunity for a state to reach out to those partners and make the case on a conservation argument as to why it may be beneficial to them to have more participation to reduce those herds. Okay, that was. Let's see. I like this. Wait, isn't that all hunters say? There's too many deer. Isn't that how they justify why hunting is important? I love you guys.
I know, me too. We used to call it when we did deer goal setting back in the mid 2000s. Hunters wanted fewer deer in many cases, and we had a conversation at the section management team level about buyer's remorse. That the hunters don't really know that that they don't. I don't think they really want this, and it turns out they didn't, because we lowered populations and had a bad winter, and they got mad again. So yeah, there's some buyer's remorse going on in some cases. So I don't disagree.
No matter what you do, somebody will be unhappy. So
right.
You highlighted retention and reactivation being highest return on investment. Do you see challenges or have suggestions on how to handle these hunters largely being held at the 1.5 deer norm versus the idea of recruiting new hunters who may be more food motivated and willing to harvest more?
Wait, say that again.
Do you see challenges or have suggestions on how to handle these hunters largely being held at 1.5 deer norm versus the idea of recruiting new hunters who may be more food motivated and willing to harvest more?
Yeah, if your deer harvest goals aren't being met, we've proven in 4 states now that a proactive communications campaign to deer hunters to harvest one more deer, or here's a place you can donate, or whatever the fact may be, there's a freezer space capacity for most hunters, and how much they're willing to keep kind of thing. It's a carrying capacity for venison for a person. But we have proven time and again that you can do proactive communications to get people to increase their harvest by 8 to 30%. Like you can increase harvest by a lot just by telling people, we need you to harvest more deer. Don't say that you're a management tool. Don't characterize a hunter as a tool to an end, but here's why we need to take more deer this year, whether it's disease management or whatever it is. You can get hunters to increase their harvest by proactive communications. And if I agree, some of these new self-sufficient, only food motivated people that have no desire for an antler to ever be harvested is just whatever is brown and down in front of them is good for them, then great. Those are exactly the hunters that we need in a lot of these states where we're overrun.
Hey, isn't just keep focusing on keeping old hunters out there a little bit longer without efforts to reduce the hunter's age, just ignoring the inevitable.
I don't think trying to retain your customers which is the cheapest thing that you can do in marketing sense. Like, the cheapest thing that you can do is retain a customer. I don't think that that's an unwise investment in time and effort. Not discounting recruitment, but if I'm doing thing one as a state agency, it needs to be make sure that we have good retention strategies in place. Thing two, good reactivation things in place. And then once those things are set and going, then I can focus my efforts on recruitment. It's if you don't have those two things going for you and those efforts aren't built, then those are the two things that you should focus on before you move your focus to recruitment. Because if you're just making a leaky bucket and putting more water in it and putting more water in it and losing all the water, then it's it's not a good effort.
I think
I
there's
think
a I think there's another way to think about older hunter recruitment or reactivation as well. Again, yeah, I mean, the question brings up the point. It's a short-term gain maybe from a numbers perspective, but it's also a cohort that brings a resource to the table that can be leveraged to introduce younger people to hunting, right? So, again, we need to avoid the trap of looking at these things as either or choices, right? So having, family events, having, ways to get older folks to share their knowledge and mentor and be part of communities to pass on that culture and heritage to younger folks. Those are all really important things to consider. And in fact, Lou mentioned the multi-state conservation grants. I'll put in a plug here for one that DJ Case got this year is looking at that, looking at the committed cohort of older hunters and how their experience and resources can be leveraged to perpetuate hunting culture. I think it's an important thing.
I would like to make the distinction that when we talk about retaining hunters, I think we're thinking about anybody who has bought a hunting license. So that
Yeah,
could dip all the way into youth, but just even
that
thinking about
starts at
young adults,
16.
Yeah.
there are so many
Well,
phases through a young adult's life where we know that they are most likely to lapse. There's the graduation of college, there's marriage, there's relocation for a
Kids.
job,
I lapsed when I
there's
had kids. Heck,
yeah. So retention is for any age. It's not just for those of us with gray hair and a limp. So there's that. Um, uh, this is a good one. Outside of adult women only, what research has been conducted on the lapse rate of adult recruited hunters? And then in parentheses, last I recalled, when the fastest growing segment of hunting was females, they were also most likely to lapse.
that's
Good point.
true. The is it retention rate is what we're after? Like the average retention
Labs.
rate?
So outside of adult women only, what research is out there that has been conducted on the lapse rate of adult recruited hunters?
Adult recruited hunters. All right, research guys.
yeah. So, I mean, I think the question kind of answers itself. There's, and it's not just women, but I think largely what the research would say is that um, adult recruited hunters have higher lapse rates than hunters who are recruited in youth by their family. So, sometimes it's called the traditional pathway. Um, those seem to forge the strongest, more lasting ties. Having said that, again, um, you know,
Well, at
there,
NDA,
okay,
we do a field to fork program, and I
yeah,
can't speak on a national level, but our field to fork program is only for adults. We don't take kids hunting. And the retention rate that we see among those adults in our program, and we take hundreds a year, it's not thousands, but it's pretty significant. Like it's among the level of what I would want my goal to be as an agency, that 80% retention. And that's been since 2016 that we've had the Field to Fork program. So I would say adult onset programs can be very successful, but I don't know that there's a national research study that's gone into if you're an adult onset hunter, which sounds like a terrible disease. Like I hate that term. One of these days we're going to come up with a better one. But if you're an adult onset hunter, how long did we retain you? Like I don't know that that study has been done.
As the director of research, I may know some people, so I'm going to dig into that one a little bit and see if I can find some help on that. Could be a future agenda and or a webinar item. So let me make a quick note here. All right, folks, this has been amazing. We're going to have one more question, and then we're going to have to call it here. I scrolled down for something that ended in a question mark. Some of you guys are giving some very good comments as well. I'm sorry, we just don't have time for everybody. This has been
They're going to be
thanks.
workshop topics.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks again to NDA and Jenifer for bringing this research to fruition and bringing it to a webinar and sharing it with us all. But I thought this was a good question to close on. When does R3 run up against crowding and access issues? Has anyone ever determined how many hunters a jurisdiction needs to balance management, revenue, access concerns, and quality hunting experiences? If you figure that out, you should buy a lottery ticket, I think.
That's the nexus of deer and R3.
Yeah.
That is
No,
it.
that feeds into the project that we did with the Max McGraw Wildlife Foundation, where there was the article written, doesn't not important who said that R3 has been so successful that it's ruined Western hunting. So we took that on as a challenge, and we did a national project using a discrete choice experiment to look at what factors are influencing a person's decision to hunt. And crowding is important, but the most important thing, especially in the West, is getting a tag in the first place. So when you distill it down to having to make a choice, crowding is it's not great, but it's something you deal with when you finally get that tag. So I think that there's no secret sauce. It depends on the state, but the power of some of these choice experiments is really elucidating what's important versus what is just annoying or something I want to gripe about or going to make me quit, right? I will quit if I have no chance of getting a license. I will quit applying rather than worrying about how many other people have the tag. But tag allocations, as you Western managers know, are set on expectations of harvest on success rates, average age class of the animal, public versus private land, crowding, and everything else. So all that gets factored in. But what we're learning from the McGraw project, and hopefully there's going to be some follow-up to that, it's that tag availability and being able to get out there in the first place is more important. I don't know if I answered the question, but
Well, listen, that's a pretty full day on this. Thanks, everybody. If you want this, once we clean the video up, this will be on the council's YouTube channel for continued viewing. Again, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you for joining in, and we hope to see you all at the National R3 Symposium in May. Thanks, everybody.